All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, so a note to our internet audience at home. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, you can call the number on your screen. We'll take care of that for you. We'll get it signed, and we will ship it to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to welcome Ms. Laurie Loewenstein and Ms. Kaylee Jones, presenting Ms. Loewenstein's new novel, Unmentionables. Ms. Loewenstein grew up in Ohio. She has master's degrees in history from Syracuse University and in creative writing from Wilkes University, and she has worked as a reporter and feature writer for various newspapers. Ms. Jones is the award-winning author of 5 novels, including A Soldier's Daughter Never Cries and Celeste Ascending, and the memoir Lies My Mother Never Told Me. Unmentionables takes place in 1917 Illinois on the verge of U.S. involvement in World War I. While the larger topics are race and women's suffrage, the characters and their courageous stands against oppression and reactionary bigotry are very relevant today. This book is the first publication by Kaylee Jones Books, a new imprint and author collective, and I'm sure they're going to tell us all about it, so please give a very warm welcome to Ms. Laurie Loewenstein and Ms. Kaylee Jones.
Hi, I'm so happy that we're here tonight to talk about this. I'll tell you a little bit about the collective, and then I'll introduce Laurie, and Laurie will read for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions from you to discuss this process. What happened was I've been teaching for about almost 25 years, I think, creative writing, and since I was in my 20s. And I've found over the years, and it wasn't great when I graduated from Columbia in my early 20s from the MFA program. It was already changing. Publishing was changing, and it was getting harder and harder for literary fiction to find homes. But then it was still not so bad. And as I started to my career and wrote my second novel and then my third novel, I got shuffled around, moved around. Agents left companies. Editors never stayed in the same place. So you were always an orphan. You were never safe. And that's now the norm. Nobody has the expectation of lasting more than one book with anybody. And this has become a real problem for serious literary writers, because if you're a quote-unquote mid-list writer, God forbid, or a quiet novelist, the 2 worst words you can be is mid-list and quiet, which is what I am, I think, across the board, or literary, you're dead. So publishers increasingly depend on MBAs and on computers to ascertain the saleability of a novel and your track record. But that's absolutely ridiculous, because your next book has nothing to do with your previous book. So that's just a ridiculous way to measure sales, and it never works. They're always wrong. So what happened is I started to see a lot of my very best students not getting their works published by mainstream publishers. And that began to really feel bad. It really felt horrible to me. And one of my former students, who's now a published writer, Nina Solomon, at one point said, why don't we start our own imprint? Why don't we start our own publishing company? And the thought was horrifying. Like, it's such an endeavor. It's so difficult to do. So I woke up one morning in October 2 years ago, and I was very sad. And I thought, this is just not working out. I can't help my students get their works published. We started out so well, and now there's, I help the books get finished. I help the books be, a manuscript that can be handed to an agent or an editor. And a lot of times we've gotten agents for these books. We just have not been able to get a mainstream publisher. So I called Johnny Temple at Akashic Books, who's been a friend for many years. His very first novel that he published, it was actually his second novel that he published with Akashic, was one of my students who could not sell his book for anything in the world. It was in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and he wrote a novel about a young man in New York who's a hustler who has HIV. And people were terrified of this book. They wouldn't touch it. And Johnny Temple published it, and it was a huge success for him. So he and I have been friends since then. That was like the early 90s. So I called him up, and I said, listen, I want to do an imprint. And he said, oh, we're having our staff meeting in an hour. I'll call you back. And I thought, oh, wow. So an hour and a half later, so meanwhile, I hung up and I called Laurie. And because I hadn't told anybody this, that I had this idea, really. So I called Laurie and I said, will you let me have your book for my imprint? And without blinking an eye, she said, sure, yes. Without having sent this book out to anybody, no agents, no editors, nobody'd seen this book. And she said, yes. So when Johnny called back, just in case he said yes, which he did an hour later, he said, yeah, we're all set to go. I said, I have my first book. He said, really? And I said, absolutely. He said, well, come on in and we'll discuss all this and get it all set up. So I had my first book already that I knew I wanted to publish, and that was Laurie's book. Now, Laurie was my student at Wilkes University for her MA, and she'd written a different novel that I absolutely adored, her first novel, which was her master's thesis, which was really a family story about Texas, about a child who's orphaned in the middle of Texas. She's in a boarding house with her dad, and her dad dies in the middle of the night, and she's left alone in this Texas town. She got an agent, and there was a lot of interest for this book, but it was too quiet, another too quiet book. So, and then her agent passed away, so Laurie was agentless and editorless with this, just going on faith with the second novel, Unmentionables, which was so great, and I knew it was great. I knew it was, really top notch. And Laurie just on faith said, yes, I'll go with you. So then we started to try to collect other writers. And in our process of doing this, we've now gathered about 8 or so absolutely professional writers who are offering all their time and energy to this process of making a collective of writers, which means that Laurie reads other manuscripts. She takes care of looking at the other jackets and discussing it. She brings people in. She's mapping out her marketing, what she's done for the next writer. And so the next writer has all the information that Laurie has. The amazing thing is Akashic's been totally supportive of us and fantastic. And they've given us, leeway. Like when I sent Johnny Laurie's book, I was waiting to hear back from them like a writer would, waiting to hear back if they were okay with the book. And he just said, okay, I'll send her the contract today. I said, you haven't read it. He said, it doesn't matter. This is your imprint. You get to do whatever you want. You get to pick the books. So I don't choose the books now. Now we have a group. We have 6 or 8 people who read the manuscripts and decide, what needs what kind of work we have to put into the next project, and we go down the line with the publishing as a group. And the sort of camaraderie has been unbelievable. It's been extraordinary. We have a real range of different kinds of writers who are all involved. The strangest thing that happened, though, that really surprised me, was I brought it up to my students, and I said, I teach in MFA programs. I'm trying to start this company. Would anybody like to help? Everybody wants to help. So I have videographers, I have PR people, and they're all willing to put their time in for this. And the reason that they're willing is because they're writers, first of all, and they feel scared and they feel threatened because they feel that they're not being represented in the mainstream publishing industry. And they're willing to put their blood, sweat, and tears into this because they feel like it's saying something about our literary world right now. And that's been an unbelievable gift. I mean, book trailers were made for free. People volunteered their energy and their time to do it. I called my boss at Wilkes University and I said, I need help. I need help with this. And she said, okay, you can have a graduate assistant for a year. Every year I have a new graduate assistant for free. They're paying that student's publishing track MFA, and I get that person to work for me for a year. And we also have interns working with us. So this has been a process of growth. And Laurie's novel, this novel took, I think, about, tell me if I'm wrong, 6 years, 5 years to write?
Yeah.
5 years to write. So none of this is easy or quick. I mean, this was a process of research, of a writing group, of saying, no, that doesn't work. You need to do this, you need to do that. And finally, we have this magnificent, beautiful novel that I think is one of the best books I've read in a very long time. And what's so interesting is that without we had no idea, out went the book, and it was chosen by the Midwest Booksellers Association for their consortium. who knew? And then the American Library Association chose Laurie's book also. So she went to the huge symposium or meeting of the American Library Association in Philadelphia this last winter, and then the book was chosen as a January pick in the Midwest Booksellers Association. So this is unbelievable to think that this is the first book of a brand new imprint, and we've had that kind of reaction, which means that there's a market, that there's a need for this. That's what it means to me, is that there's a real need and people are hungry for serious literature. So I'll introduce Laurie, and Laurie can tell you a little bit about this process and maybe read for a few minutes from the book, and then you can ask questions if you'd like.
Thanks. Thank you all for coming. I guess one reason I'm happy that Kaylee started the imprint was not just because my book got to be published, but I'm an avid reader. I'm a reader way before I was a writer, and I do feel that there's probably many books out there, novels, that have not been published because they're not considered mainstream. The mainstream publishers don't think they can sell them. And so the readers, never get to see these books, or it's hard to find them. I mean, this bookstore is a wonderful resource, but many towns don't have an independent bookstore any longer. So to get these little gems that are hard to find as a reader just doesn't happen as often. So, Kaylee's imprint hopefully will bring more and more of those to light. As a writer, the process for me, and I think most writers I've discovered, is that you don't do it by yourself. And I guess the image I always had is the writer alone at the desk typing away on the computer. But this is such a collaborative process, and to have a writer's imprint seems like just an extension of that. It's just a natural extension of the writing process, which is writing and sharing with other writers and getting feedback and then doing it again. And I think I did 12 revisions and getting input from other people. And we have a gentleman here tonight, Don Sackwriter, who is very experienced with the collaborative efforts that writers need. He studied at the Colony, which is a very famous writers' retreat in Illinois that was founded by Kaylee's dad, James Jones, and Lowney Handy. And Don knows that it takes a lot of writers together to make good writing. So I think that this process I've discovered was helpful in that way, and it's important that writers help one another, not compete against each other. And so I'm really proud to be part of the imprint.
I think that in the old days, right, before there were really MFA programs, writers hung out together and discussed their works and had salons and had exchanges of ideas and manuscripts and so forth. The MFA program has kind of taken the place in a lot of ways of the not only writer-writer relationship, but also like a place for writers to gather. But it's also replaced the editor-writer relationship. Like, books go out now to the publishing houses, and they're totally done. They're polished. They're pretty much finished nowadays. Editors don't take a writer and say, I want to be with you for the rest of my life. Like the relationship between William Styron and his editor, for example, or Maxwell Perkins and Hemingway, or Fitzgerald. Those relationships just don't exist anymore. So the MFA programs kind of replace that. But what happens when you graduate and you're done, and you're suddenly thrown? I remember graduating from Columbia and suddenly being thrown out into the world and having absolutely no idea what to do and where to go and where to get help and to get feedback. And I thought, if I ever have a chance to do anything with this, I will never drop my students when they graduate. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to keep working with them. And that was a commitment I made, and I haven't really ever broken that commitment of dropping people just because they graduate, And it's a lifelong commitment of time, and it's really a passion. But I used to be unsure if it was really true about publishing, but now I'm convinced that it's true about mainstream publishing, that it's a numbers game. And the problem is that they don't know. They never know what's going to be a bestseller. They think they do, but they absolutely don't. And when an MBA tells you on the phone, when you call somebody and say, this happened when Joseph Heller wrote an introduction to one of my dad's books of letters, and my mother called the editor and said, oh my God, I'm so happy Joseph Heller's going to write the introduction, and the 25-year-old editor said, who's Joseph Heller? Then you really have to ask yourself, what's going on? You know, what's wrong with this picture? You know, honestly, these people are choosing what we're going to read. And there's a kind of general, I don't want to be preachy, but a kind of dumbing down of, you know, what they think people want to read about, I think. And it's unfortunately true. Like, I have a friend who used to be the vice chairman of NASDAQ who never went home. He slept in the office. He had a sleeping bag in his office. I mean, this guy worked 24/7. And he said to me, you know, I'm glad you're a writer and that's all great, but when I'm not working, I don't feel like I don't want to read something that's like going to make me think. You know, I don't want to think. I want to read something really like, you know, like a mystery or a spy thriller, you know. I don't want to think. And I realized, wow, he's right. Most people don't really want to think. So we're very few. You know, the people who really want to read a book to think about the world are not many, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I guess I was also thinking that with the imprint, the writer is now have a chance to do things that don't involve just writing. As I had to build my own website, and which was a big learning curve, and you know, decide on my presentation when I went to bookstores, and write letters, and try and think of creative marketing tools to get my book out and get myself out to the public. And my book is set on the Chautauqua Circuit, which was a well-known traveling lecture circuit starting around 1907. So I was trying to connect towns that had the Chautauqua. So I guess it really pushed me beyond just writing to try and think of all these other areas, which are now really all authors, whether they're mainstream publishing or in a small independent press, need to think about, because the mainstream publishers are not able to support those big marketing efforts like they used to do. So more and more is incumbent upon the writer, I think, and this is just a great opportunity. And so I'm going to, read a little bit, and then we'll answer any questions. So this is from the first chapter of the book. The breezes of Macomb County usually journeyed from the west, blowing past and moving quickly onward, for the county was just en route, not a final destination. On this particular night, the wind gusted inexplicably from the east, rushing over fields of blue-stem grasses, which bent their seed heads like so many royal subjects. A queen on progress, the currents then traveled above farmhouses, barely visible behind the tasseled corn, and swept down the deeply shaded streets of Emporia, where they finally reached the great tent, inflating the canvas walls with a transforming breath from the wider world. The farm wives had staked out choice spots under the brown canvas, an area clear of poles, but not far from the open flaps, where they might feel the strong breeze that relieved the oppressiveness of the muggy August evening. The ladies occupied themselves with their knitting needles or watched the crew assembling music stands. Some fretted about sons already drafted for the European trouble and awaiting assignment to training camps scattered across the country. They pushed back thoughts of the steaming canning vats they faced when the week-long Chautauqua Assembly of 1917 concluded. All they would have to get through another dreary winter were the memories of the soprano's gown of billowing chiffon, the lecturer's edifying words, the orchestras and quartets. The strings of bare bulbs that swagged the pitched roof were suddenly switched on. The scattered greetings of howdy do and evening grew steadily as the crowd gathered, burdened with seat cushions, palmetto fans, and white handkerchiefs. Leafing through the souvenir program, they scrutinized the head and shoulders photograph of the evening speaker, a handsome woman wearing a rope of pearls. She was described as a well-known author, advocate for wholesome living, and suffragist. What exactly was this lecture, Barriers to the Betterment of Women, about? Some expected a call for more female colleges, others for voting rights. And then Marion Elliott Adams, a tall and striking woman in her early 30s, swept onto the stage. She wore a rippling striped silk caftan and red Moroccan sandals. With dark eyes and dramatically curved brows, her appearance hinted at the exotic. In ringing tones, she announced, "I am here tonight to discuss the restrictive nature of women's undergarments." Hundreds of heads snapped back. The murmurs of the crowd, the creaking of the wooden chairs stopped abruptly. Even the bunting festooning the stage hung motionless, as if it had the breath knocked out of it. Marian's gaze swept across the pinched faces, assessing the souls spread before her, and she concluded that these were the same people that she'd been lecturing to for the past 3 months. There was the gaunt-cheeked elder with his chin propped on a cane, the matron with the bolster-shaped bosom, the banker type in a sack coat, the slouching clerk with dingy cuffs. Just like the night before and the night before that, stretching back 83 straight nights, these strangers she knew so well. So the chapter continues on, and Marian begins her lecture, and we get to see a little bit of the audience. Many of the people in the audience are characters in the novel. Deuce is a publisher of the small-town newspaper here in western Illinois, and his stepdaughter Helen, who's 19, and she can't wait to get out of this little town. And then his neighbor Chula, who's has a secret crush on the publisher. So Marian is continuing with her speech, and the audience sort of settles in to listen. So she says, because clothing constitutes both a real and symbolic hindrance to women taking their rightful place in our country's civic, occupational, and educational realms, did you know that a woman preparing to go out in public routinely dons 25 pounds of clothing? 25 pounds, imagine. And all of that is hidden, almost all of it is hidden from view, and almost all of it serves no practical purpose. Beneath every dainty shirtwaist and skirt lie layer upon layer of restrictive undergarments. She counted them off on her fingers: combination suit, petticoat, corset, corset cover, hose, hose supporter. These are the unmentionables that every woman struggles against. These are the invisibilities that drag down her limbs, sap her energy, prevent her from full participation in community life. Yes, we have made some strides in the last 40 years. The hourglass figure, the tight lacings are mercifully things of the past, but more must be done. As Marian spoke, she paced quickly across the stage, and her caftan gracefully shifted in the current. Some of the men wondered just what sort of unmentionables Mrs. Elliott Adams had on under the silk that swirled around her well-proportioned limbs. Deuce Garland, a widower of 2 years and a publisher of the newspaper The Clarion, was among them. He balanced a notebook on his calf, pencil resting on a blank page. In times past, he'd have written half of his article before the lecturer even stepped on stage. And he would write something like, Chautauqua opened an Emporia with a bang last evening when 3,000 citizens of all ages gave a rousing welcome to... And that was what came of publishing 16 years of publishing in a small-town daily with the modest ambitions and a mission of boosterism. So Marian continues to talk, and I'm just going to skip to the very end here. So she, the end of her speech, people give her a big cheer, and they start to filter out, and Helen rushes up to the stage. She wants to talk to the famous speaker, and Marian is starting to leave the stage. And Helen calls out to her, and she says, "Oh, I loved your speech." And Marian turns back, and she says, "Oh, I'm so glad to hear that." And Helen says, "Women here need to hear this, especially in Emporia. It's so backwards." And Marian says, "I'm finding that in many Midwestern towns." And she strides toward Helen with her sandals clacking against her heels. Marian was lowering herself into a crouch so that she could speak directly to the girl when her tunic caught on a loose nail. She yanked the hem, throwing herself off balance, and stumbled forward headlong off the platform. Flailing wildly, her legs flew up and over. Her left ankle smacked sharply against a folding chair, and her tailbone thudded against the trampled grass. She crashed in a heap at Helen's feet. So Helen is very upset. The speaker is lying there on the grass, and a few people come over to help out, including the town physician, Dr. Jack. And so he starts looking at her ankle and says, well, it might be broken, and Marian doesn't want to hear about this. She says, it's my right foot and it hurts like hell, Marian said in a loud voice. All right, said the doctor, let's start there. And he checks her leg and says, well, I'm not sure, it could be broken. And she says, is it broken? Do you think it's broken? It can't be, it can't. he says, well, I'm not certain, but it could be. And she says, but I'm booked for Galesburg tomorrow. I have to be there. You just have to wrap it or splint it or something. I'll manage. So the doctor said, well, you just have to stay off it a couple of days. And Darius Calhoun, the platform manager, worms into the circle, and he says, she can't stay a day or two. Didn't you hear the woman? She's doing Galesburg, he said, his small body quivering so that with white pants and tufted eyebrows, he gave the impression of a fox terrier. And then the day after that, it's Blanchester, and then he pulled a creased schedule from his pocket, and then Vernon. So the doctor says, no, I'm sorry, it's too dangerous, she's got to stay. So Tula, the neighbor, speaks up. She says, she can stay with me. So Mrs. Flynn, the druggist's wife, grabs Tula's arm, and she says, but what about the welcome reception at the refreshment tent? The ladies are all set up. And then Tula says, you have to tell them there's been an accident. And so Marion, still protesting, was lifted onto a stretcher by 4 of the strongest stagehands, shoveled into the back of Mueller's florist delivery truck, which, fortuitously, was parked nearby, and transported down several bumpy streets with the little platform manager trotting nervously behind. After receiving the bad news from Mrs. Flynn, the members of the Ladies' Welcome Committee despondently dumped the galvanized tub of ice and reclaimed their cakes that, in the heat, had slumped to one side like elderly choir members during a long sermon. As the ladies left the grounds, the first coin-sized drops of a heavy rainfall hit the ground. The thunderstorm, so long threatening, had arrived. Thank you.
So Marion ends up having to stay in this town, and her influence really affects everybody, especially Deuce and his daughter. And she brings with her sort of the modern world, into this town. But she also changes, which is what was really interesting about this story, is her arc is so interesting that she realizes that she's been running away too, and that it's very easy to be independent when you're always on the road, and you don't have to make relationships with people, you don't have to interact with people. And it's just a really fabulous novel, incredibly well researched. But when you read it, you don't have this feeling of research, like, look what I looked up, which often when you read historical novels happens. There's like info dumps, people just have to drop. The other thing that happens in historical novels, too, that I've found over the years is a kind of misplaced modernity, like a 21st century point of view that's sort of, slapped onto 18th century French villages. And it doesn't work. You have to really pay attention to the time, the time in which the story takes place. And Laurie did that impeccably in this book. And I think that's unusual in historical novels, because we have hindsight now. We can look back on that time and say, oh, look at how backward people were. Look at how racist people were. But the truth is that people didn't think that way about themselves. And that's what's interesting, is how perceptions change or don't, with generation after generation. And what's really interesting, too, is she ends up going off to France and driving a truck on the front lines during the First World War. And that's a fabulous. That was very difficult in the structure of the book, because suddenly you had this main character leave this town and come back later. And so how do you keep that story going? How do you keep that story interwoven? And we figured out one way was to have letters, and also to go back to the town every other chapter so that you never lost track of the people there. But to do that the way you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if she's going to go back, and if she does go back, what's going to happen. So it's got a lot of tension in it for a quiet historical novel. Do you have any questions for us, for either one of us, about the imprint or about the process or what we're doing? Don't be shy. Feel free to ask.
Well, I've got a question for each of you, so who would like to go first?
Whoever you want, go ahead.
I was wondering, did you kind of live for a while you were writing the book in the early 20th century? Were you kind of dreaming and going through your life and looking at things through the eyes of a 1915?
Yes, I did. I think probably most novelists do that in some way. But yes, I also tried to sample all different kinds. I looked at silent films from the period, and I tried to play music from that you'd hear at the time on a gramophone, and looked at old photographs. But yes, I tried to project what life would really be like in that time and in that place.
There's a funny story. Dr. Cox, he's a librarian at Wilkes, and he's an expert in this period, and especially of engines, right, or
trolley cars.
Trolley cars of that period.
Yes.
So Laurie said to him, Dr. Cox, what were trolleys like in Chicago, at this time? Because Helen goes to Chicago, and he arrived the next day with the actual money machine from the trolley where you put the dime in and you push the button, and it was about 7,000 pounds, and he arrives with this thing to show Laurie how it works. And she gave him a thank you in the book, but he knows anything you want to know about trolley cars. This is the guy, and he happened to be at Wilkes, so we were lucky with that.
Yes, and the trolley stops that they make in my book are accurate. And I had someone from Chicago come up and say, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Well,
Dr. Cox.
Dr. Cox." So, yeah, books take a lot of work.
There was a fairly well-known futurist at the turn of the century, 1900, who said, "Well, I can't predict everything that's going to happen, but I can tell you one thing for sure: this next century will be the century of the trolley."
Oh my!
By 1923, that was the end. Okay, I have one more question.
Yes.
I don't want to monopolize, but Kaylee, it's intriguing to me to think that basically you have this plurality of editors making comments on one manuscript at a time. I'm wondering, have you ever seen that before? Is there some precedent?
There's more and more of that in mainstream publishing. Like there's the team now, and the team is like, the PR person, the money guy, the editor, the editor's assistant, and they all get together and they discuss. So the problem with that is that by consensus, you can't usually have a great book. It's just by consensus, it just weakens everything, right? Like nobody takes any chances if it's by consensus. We just happen to be a bunch of really crazy, weird people who like strange things. So we don't have consensus usually with our readers either. Like one book that I really loved, a couple of people were not crazy about, so we had to really discuss it and decide how to approach it and what needed to be changed, and how to, like, one book, the beginning was problematic, very problematic, and I gave it to Nina Solomon, whose book is going to be coming out next year, because she really liked that book. Laurie did not love that book, so she wasn't the person to go to, when you're not. So I gave it. Nina loved it already, so I gave it to Nina, and she read it, and she came up with a solution for the first chapter that was absolutely brilliant and fixed the problem, something I couldn't see. So the more intelligent, opinions you have, the better off you are, I think. But I don't say, sometimes I might say, I haven't had to say this, I'm doing it anyway, even though you guys don't like it. But that's not happened yet. There's been a very strong feeling of agreement, I think, pretty much, right?
Yes.
Over the general choices that we've made.
Right.
Usually we're looking for socially conscious books. It doesn't have to be present time, but books that are addressing some kind of social issue of a time that makes you think about it as the reader in an entertaining way. We're not standing on some soapbox, but makes you think. Like this book has a very kind of buried racism in this town, and it's very sad and horrible to see the kind of injustice that occurred routinely, and that was very interesting to us. That now it's different, but it's not. It's a different kind of racism, or whatever. But so it was really socially, I think, interesting and important because it's about us going to war too, and about resisting change. And I think that's what it's all about: is the resistance, resisting change.
How was the genesis of this book? So for you, why you inspire? Sorry, because I'm not mad. Why you take this inspiration to write something about one very old time?
Right.
What was the inspiration?
Well, I wanted a strong woman character, and I wanted her to be sort of an activist that would sort of blow into this town and shake things up. And I had been wandering through the library stacks, I found a really interesting book on the history of fashion. And there was a little piece in there about this woman from around 1910 who was a dress reform advocate, among other things. And she advocated no corsets, and she walked around in this one-piece garment that she designed herself, and she wore it around Greenwich Village and attracted all kinds of attention. And she just was so fascinating to me that I based my character on her main character. And then I brought in other little pieces. Another character is based loosely on Warren G. Harding, who's the president from Ohio, from the town I'm from. And so you just sort of collect things. And then I knew I needed to have my woman speaker traveling to these towns. So then I discovered the Chautauqua Circuit, which was incredibly well known from around 1900 to 1920s. Was called the most American thing in America by Theodore Roosevelt. Everyone knew what this was. Of course, now it's defunct. There's still the Chautauqua Institution, but the traveling Chautauqua that went to these little towns in the Midwest is long gone. But at the time, it was so important, and it brought culture and edification and famous orators to all these little towns, and I just thought that was fascinating.
I didn't think it was fascinating at all. I was really worried. I mean, Laurie said, I have this great idea for another, for my next novel, and it's about the Chautauqua Circuit. And I'm looking at her like, what? Oh no, my God, what is she going to write? But it was that beginning, I mean, it's so stunning. And it was, this character was so interesting and then you suddenly realize, wow, that really is an incredible part of Americana that very few people still know about. So it ended up being, but it wasn't an automatic like, oh yeah, what a great idea. I was a little resistant. I mean, but again, you have to be really open to things that aren't up your alley, so to speak. Things that are totally foreign. I didn't grow up here. I'd never even heard of Chautauqua. I thought it was a religious institution. I said, oh my God, she's going to write a book about a religious institution that goes around doing evangelical, meetings or something. But it had nothing to do with that. But I didn't know. I had no idea what it was, starting off.
Yes.
Relationship in regards to like copyrights and who gets paid what. When the book becomes a bestseller, how do you divide up the money if you're all coalescing to write the book?
We are under the umbrella of Akashic Books, and so I'm acting as not an agent, but I would say like an editor at large for Akashic Books. So the books have my name on them, but we have the same contract as all the Akashic books have, and it's a standard contract. Now, Johnny Temple in 1990, when was that? 95 or whatever, when he started this company, was breaking the mold. This is before ebooks even. He had a 50-50 breakdown, and that was it. And no advance. So, like from the first book that sells, you get 50%, and so it broke this mold of the normal 6% of each book you get if you get an advance, and then there's this whole return problem. What?
50% goes to her, 50% goes to the company.
Yes.
To you and to
That's I don't want to get into the details of how we broke that down, but that's the basic Akashic model, right? That's what they do, and Johnny Temple has been, he's one of the very few independent publishers that stuck it out almost 20 years now, and he's had some major successes, like the Noir series is enormous, and Go to Sleep, that was a huge bestseller for them, absolutely out of the ballpark. So they're able now to give little advances, to take more chances than they were before because of their success. But he's never lost his moral, compass. He's always, first and foremost, is the book good? That's all he cares about. He doesn't care if he thinks he can sell 5 copies or 50,000 copies. He doesn't care. But he's very shrewd. He's a real shrewd businessman. And I've always admired his strength and his passion, So
Right.
he was the perfect.
Integrity.
Somebody else wanted. I put this idea by another company, and they were desperate to have me go with them. But I went with Akashic because I have faith in him, and I have a friendship with him, And I know that he'll support us, and that's what mattered to me the most, was that we would have, you know, the benefit of their 20 years of experience, you know.
How do you handle submissions?
Well, that's a big problem for us because I have only volunteer readers. We have the collective, which is us, and then we have graduate assistants and a GA and a few other people who volunteered. So we've not opened submissions. We don't have open submissions. We
actually doing this, I would imagine.
We get it anyway. We get it anyway. We're swamped. Agents are calling me all the time, emailing me. Agents, like big agents. Usually agents are sending us books that made the rounds and couldn't find a publisher. And unfortunately, they're not always that good. I mean, they think this is the last chance saloon, you know? And that's not what we're about at all. So I don't want their rejects. You know, that's sometimes something like that will happen where the book is absolutely amazing and you think, how in the world did this not get taken, you know? But for the most part, we have a readership. Each book gets 2 reads to start with. Usually I read it first, and then it gets 2 reads. But we have not opened to one of our writers wanted to open it. Like, let's be real socialists. Let's open it all up. Let's open the gates. And I'm like, you're crazy. We're not going to be able to survive if we do that. We don't have the time. So we're not open. But people still find ways around it. I mean, friends call me all the time. Agents call me all the time. Editors call me, you know, and they want us to read. So when we think it's something that's viable for us, then we take it and then we give it to 2 readers. And that's all volunteers. They're not getting paid a cent, but they feel like they're participating in a, like they feel like they've got some control, you know, over the outcome of serious literature, where writers feel so out of control these days. Literary writers feel like they have absolutely no control over their destiny. So you get a feeling that you're actually helping another writer and that you have some control over the outcome, you know.
How would you define success?
Success is...
In the sense of, like, how long will you give to each book?
Johnny Temple never goes out of print.
Do you, is anyone good? I mean, will the numbers matter? How will you distribute through Akashic?
Akashic has... Akashic has a phenomenal distributor called Consortium Books. They've developed this relationship over almost 20 years, and Consortium would do anything for Akashic. They absolutely adore them. And they're so happy when they get a book that they can really push, like Laurie's book was an easy sell for them. They were so thrilled. The Midwest Consortium people were out of their minds. They were so delighted. And so, you know, it's really about marketability in that sense. And if you get attention, like the attention that Laurie got, that's like a stamp of approval, first of all. How many copies sell is another matter. But if you're shrewd the way Johnny is and you do it right, you never go out of print. You don't have to make thousands and thousands of copies all at once and then get these returns. You do a smaller print, and then you do another small print, and you do another small print, and the books stay in print.
And how many will you publish a year?
2 hard books a year, and we're starting an E-line, an E-first line, which is a whole nother game, right, which we know we're really just learning. And so a lot of the research and time that my students, my interns are doing is research on ebook publishing, which is they're e-first with a print-on-demand option. So basically on Amazon or whatever, you click paperback and it comes in 2 days. It's exactly the same. But the difference is bookstores don't make the copy, so there is no bookstore representation. That's the problem with the ebook model, really. So it's very internet-based. The problem is to me what's amazing is the number of people, I don't mean to say this in a room full of writers, don't get mad at me, but the incredible number of people who think that they can write having never read is absolutely extraordinary to me. Like you say, somebody says, oh, I'm writing a novel about a lawyer. Oh, and what are you? Oh, I'm a lawyer. Well, what have you read? What books by lawyers have you read? Have you read, Scott Turow? Oh, no, I don't read. You don't read? No, I don't want to be influenced. I don't want to be influenced. And I'm like, if you don't read, how do you know what a cliche is? How do you know what's been done if you don't read? oh, well, I don't have time to read. To me, this is staggering. So they get rejected, right? So then they self-publish in ebook form. So there's this massive tsunami of self-published books that are absolutely unreadable. And then they send out emails saying, buy my book. Buy my book. And if I bought every book that everybody asked me to buy every day, I would be drowning in books, you know. And that's not a marketing plan, right? That's not a marketing plan. So we're trying to start this ebook line, and it's working out very well. I mean, we have the go-ahead. We did one book. We're going to do a few more. And that opens up our options. We can do more books. A hard book, like Laurie's, a hard copy, is a lot longer process. It's more complicated, more difficult. They have to measure a bunch of different things against, you know, how many copies to make for the first printing. You know, it's a very different market. And so we're learning as we go. We're learning. We also have learned that social media does not sell books. It gets your name out there, but it doesn't mean anybody's going to buy your book. That's very interesting. That there's no correlation between your social media presence and your sales. It's very interesting.
Does Akashic, sorry, now I'm running.
Go ahead, please, Christina.
Does Akashic help you with PR? Like, will
They-
they do publicity?
Unbelievable work. And they have the relationships already because they've been in play for almost 20 years. So they have all these friends in different areas of publishing, which we could have set out on our own and done this. It would have been a disaster. It would have been a whole other, you know, because we don't know. We don't have the relationships. We don't have the knowledge that they've gained over 20 years of doing this, you know.
And how long have you given yourself to continue doing this? Like,
I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. It's not about the money. I mean, it really isn't. It's about what's it about? I don't know. It's about feeling like I'm taking back control, in some ways, of my life and my, you know.
I commend you. I think it's phenomenal. It's so exciting, and we can't wait to see.
The amazing thing is what you're saying is the generosity of people. Like, I have a student, I was talking about this, and I teach at Southampton College in Manhattan. It's SUNY Stony Brook. And I teach there, and this is last semester, I was talking to my students about this. I'm saying, oh, the first book's coming out. I'm so excited. It's really exciting. I don't know what I'm doing, you know. And this young man said to me, by the way, I'm a videologist. I make videos for corporations. I do commercials. If you need any help, I want to help. I want to do whatever I can. So he made all by himself the entire book trailer for the next book, the one after Laurie's, for free because he feels passionate about it. He cares about this. You know, the ebook that we did, Foamers, it's a post-apocalyptic kind of novel. The guy did the entire thing for free. Did a whole shoot, like a fight scene between my daughter, who was 14, and this enormous guy, this monster. And it took about 12 hours to shoot, and then another 6 weeks to edit. And he did that for free because he felt that it was an important thing to do. That, to me, is amazing. Who does that anymore? Who says, I'll do it for you for free? I'll read books for you for free. I'll help you. I've never heard of such a thing. I've never seen so much passion, you know? And I just say help, and everybody comes running. I've never seen anything like that before. I mean, really, I think it's because writers feel empowered by this in a way that they feel unempowered by mainstream publishing.
I think you're right, 100% right. And I think you've hit something. You're doing something right if you're getting that kind of response.
From people who...
Mm-hmm. And it seems very authentic. And I think that's probably what people are responding to, is the authenticity of it.
I mean, 2 agents called me after Laurie got this ALA thing, and the Midwest Writers Consortium, 2 different agents called me and said, does Laurie have an agent? And I said, I think her agent passed away, but I'll call her. I'll call her and see if she wants to talk to you. So I call Laurie and I say, hey, by the way, these 2 agents are interested in you. You should probably talk to them because, you know, maybe your next book will, you know, you can get an advance and you can be mainstream. She said, no, thank you. I want to stay here. Who does that? Who does that? I mean, this is, even Johnny Temple says, you know, your next book is going to, like Marlon James was discovered by me and by Johnny Temple in Jamaica. His first novel he sent it to every publisher in America. I handed the manuscript to Johnny. I said, you got to publish this. Immediately said yes. His second novel was Riverhead Press, major press, and he won he was nominated for a Book Critics Circle Award, National Book Critics Circle Award for his second novel. So he chose to go that route, and that's completely fine. Johnny's like, yeah, do it. That's great. So in some ways, it can be used as a platform to open doors for people if that's the way they want to go. That's fine. That's totally fine. But that's different than building a real. We don't know. We'll see, right? We're right in the beginning. So.
Yes. I think you can tell Kaylee is very passionate about the process and about her students, and I think that's why people step up, because she really cares about these things and cares that there are books that should be published and are not getting out, and she's worked so long and hard with students and feels that they're worthy, and it's her passion, I think, that really drives the imprint, and it's a great thing.
Laurie worked 5 years on this novel, right? But she didn't send it to anybody. You could have sent it out. We could have found an agent, even though your agent passed away, and sent this book out, right? No problem. I gave this book to my agent the other day. I went to see my agent, and I handed her the book. She looked at it, and the first thing she said was right away, Marilyn Robinson, who's a great influences of Laurie's. So she got that right away. So, there is a market, and there would have been a market for this book. But Laurie chose not to go that route, to really, go this way and see if we could do this together. So it's a process. We're working on it. But imagine spending 5 years on something like this, and you send it out, and you get an agent, and you get hopeful, and then you get turned down by everybody. For what reason? Well, we don't know if we can sell it. We don't know how to market this. That's the new one. There's two things they say now. We don't know how to market this. And then the other thing they say is the characters are not likable enough. That's one I've heard like 1,000 times. The characters aren't likable enough. What does that even mean? My God, like half the literature of the planet would be gone if you were concerned about likability of characters, So there's kind of dumbing down going on, I think. But maybe I'm just in a bad mood. No, I don't think. There are great books out there. There are some wonderful novels out there. Recently, I've read a few that I thought were great.
Have you thought about audiobooks? And if not,
why not? Audio. Don't tell me another thing. I don't want to. Oh my God. That's all we need is to be worrying about audio now. Yeah. Yes, of course. If somebody will volunteer, we'll do it for sure, right? We just need somebody with the machine and the thing. And
how about you? I can record it.
Hey!
Just get someone to read it. I'm not going to do that.
No, we're going to have the authors read.
I'd love to get it in audio. I really would, because I've been reading it. And it's obviously a good historical novel. And this is something that's so great to give to young children that I say young children, I'm 15, 16. Because they'll learn something about it's like Dreamers of the Day. That I love that book. Yeah. And it sounds like it's kind of like that, and you learn so much about what was happening.
Yeah, about our history.
And yet you're enjoying it. Right. Plus, for those who don't speak good English, if they listen to it on audio while they're reading the book, this is a good way of learning English for a lot of the children that we have.
We have to do audio, but it's another one of those things, like it's another part of the process that we haven't gotten to. I'm still just trying to shovel coal into the engine of this boat, That's what I'm doing, and I'm like, you pilot, don't talk to me, just let me do the editing, because that's what I'm good at, and you guys worry about the rest. I mean, there's so much to do. There's so much to do. I've never worked this hard in my life, and I love every minute of it, but it's a lot of work. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Well, I just want to say, of course, everybody likes to have a love scene in a story. And, I mean, if there's any such thing as a clean love scene, you wrote a clean love scene, and it was very effective. It was the part of the book that I did read several times. You just kind of read it, and go back and read it again. And at my age, that was exciting. That was a good lesson.
Thank you.
Somebody asked Laurie. Somebody was appalled by that. Said, it was such a perfect book, and then you had to go put those love scenes in. Why did you do that?
Graphic
Sex scenes. She was appalled by. So we're happy to hear that.
Yes, thank you.
Where are you from? Indiana.
Oh, you have a southern accent.
Yes, I'm from a very religious community. And, I've been spreading her book around among my friends. I've got a high school girlfriend that belongs to a book club, and she's promising me that they're going to get this book. And I told her, you know, you're going to love the love scene. At our age, you're going to love the love scene. So,
Thank you.
I think maybe it's fair to share with them your experience with the first novel grant and how you gained a lot of experience there.
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we many years, 1992, I think, the James Jones Society, Literary Society was founded in Robinson, Illinois, and Don and I were there, and I didn't want to do a society. I really didn't want to get involved in something like that, but I said to Don, I'll do it if we start a fellowship, a book, a first novel fellowship for unpublished first novels. And Don said, well, I'll put the money up. So we had our money to start with our fellowship. And we've been going now since 1992, and every year we give $10,000 to an unpublished manuscript. And we've had, you can't believe the reactions of people when they get that call that they won. It's like one of those highlights of your life, People drop the phone, they cry hysterically, they can't believe it. And most of them, not all, but most of them have gone on to really serious careers. It launched many careers. It gave them an entree.
To get into a publisher's office or to an agent's office, and you're talking about agents like they are looking for things, but you can't get their attention.
Right, because a slush pile is a slush pile, right? And it's an intern reading through the manuscripts, and how do they know what? They're so sick of it. They're like piles like this.
But we have the help of Wilkes University to read for us from the English department.
We
couldn't
pay
handle
the readers. We pay our readers to read them. There's an entry fee, and the entry fee goes towards paying the readers. It used to be for mailings and stuff, but we have an actual foundation, like an endowment or whatever you call it, where we haven't had to draw on that endowment because we use the money that comes in from, Don put down the money to start this thing, and then we've been, we sort of take the money from the entry fee to pay the administrator, to pay the readers, and every manuscript gets 2 reads. Again, that's sort of the model that I used for our publishing company, is every manuscript gets 2 shots,
And if there's disagreement, then it gets a tiebreaker.
A third reader. A tiebreaker, and then it goes to the next round, and then we've had a lot. I tend to pick the hard sell in those situations. Like if one of them is clearly going to get published and it's clearly commercial, I take the hard sell because I figured that's the book that needs this more. The other one's going to make it anyway. And we've had amazing success. Yeah. And that's what sort of started me.
It gave you a lot of experience to get into this, actually.
Yeah. Without that experience, I never would have been able really to do this. My strength is as an editor is shape, is sort of structure. That's what I'm good at. So I can work with things that are unfinished, and I can sort of really get a sense of something's working, And I knew this book was working way back when, but it was time we needed.
Yes.
And I think, I mentioned that to you today, it was as if you lived in that time. The way you wrote it, it's not like you did research, it's actually like you lived that and wrote about it. It's not realistic.
I didn't even realize the amount of research that she did. It's incredible.
It doesn't come across as research, it just comes across as you live that.
Thank you.
I'm quite fascinating about the writer, because I think somebody is very writer, so he dedicates 5 years of his life to write. I think he must have very important thing to tell, or he must have inside himself something very important. Because sometimes you see books, the 10 page that they are commercial books, maybe they sell a lot, because I can see also in Italy that in the first number, the first seller, but then there are nothing. You read, you after 5 minutes you don't remember. And then it's like the movie, the same thing. But to write for 5 years, so I think it's one very intensive working yourself first, because also for research, also find the word, find the thing to tell to the people,
Right.
because you must fascinate the people too.
Yes.
People who read must be interested to read.
Yeah.
This is something to me, I'm very, I don't say the exact word, I'm very fascinated. This is the real word, and also I say thanks that there is people that can do this, because now in our society everything is so commercial.
Yeah.
Also, I like this one you say about the independent, because
One of
also in Italy they not exist anymore. They are a big group,
Yeah, yeah.
and they
It's more and more like that, actually.
and they
even in France.
vampirize all the small ones.
Yeah.
Or same that for the bookstore, the small bookstore, they cannot live anymore because they have no profit.
Our second novel, which is coming out in July 1st, which is a coal mining story from Scranton, Pennsylvania, about her. It's actually based on her family's history, family story. Was chosen as by Publishers Weekly as one of the best summer books. Can you imagine? Of the thousands and thousands of books that come out, it was chosen. I almost fell off the chair. And this is only our second one. So we're third one. I'm sorry. Of course, but I don't think they count ebooks in that.
No, I was saying I have your third one.
Oh, you've written our third one.
Yes.
We're up to 6 already. So we have a couple of years. We're 2 years. We're 2 years in, Laurie, or how far are we? Two years at least, right?
Yeah, 1.5 years, I think.
Yeah. And we're working on the ebook line now, seeing what we can do with that, because that'll be a lot easier,
But the thing to translate the book for the foreign country.
Yeah, Akashic is dealing with foreign rights. Yeah, so.
I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, if there are no more questions, a reminder for our internet audience at home that you still have time to call, purchase a copy of the book, and we will send it to you wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. Also, a note that all of our live streamed events are archived. So you can visit the Books and Books website, go to the live streaming link, and any author appearance that has been broadcast from here will be saved there for you to watch at your convenience. For those of you here in the house, we have Unmentionables. Wait, I'm sorry, did I got that right? Yeah, okay. We do have Unmentionables, as well as some of Kaylee Jones's titles for sale at the counter over there. The ladies are going to be signing over there at the table to the left of the two stools. And this has been such an interesting presentation. Please give them another hand. Thanks very much.